Good morning, 8th grade. Mr. Franklin here. We are starting a brand new unit today, the Civil Rights Movement. So today's lesson on Emmett Till will be the very first lesson in the Civil Rights Movement. You're going to listen to Mr. Franklin's presentation. You're going to read about Emmett Till. You're going to answer some questions. It's going to be super straightforward, super simple, super easy. You can do it. I want to see 100% engagement. I don't want to have anybody not doing their work today. This is our final unit of the year. We are winding down and getting towards the end. So stay close, pay attention, and let's talk about Emmett Till. All right, who was Emmett Till? So Emmett Till was the individual whose death sparked the civil rights movement. So the modern civil rights movement, when we think about Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, we think about the sit-ins, the freedom rides, etc., all of that was sparked and set off by the death of a Chicagoan by the name of Emmett Till. So we're going to learn about him today. He was born in 1941 on the south side of Chicago, and he died in 1955. This is him right here. Who was he? So he was a 14-year-old Chicagoan. He was smart. He was funny. He was popular. He lived on the south side with his mother. His father died when he was younger. He was murdered on August 28, 1955 in Mississippi, and his death sparked the modern civil rights movement. Let's talk about a little bit about Emmett Till. He lived on the south side with his mom. His father died when he was younger. He owned one thing of his father's, and that was a ring. He owned his father's ring. So essentially, well, let me back up a little bit. He went in the summer of 1955 to basically spend the summer with his cousins in place called Money, Mississippi. Very tiny little small town in Mississippi. Emmett was a city boy, all right? He lived and grew up in the city of Chicago. So when he went to Money, Mississippi in 1955, he was sort of out of his element. He was very, very bright, very smart. He understood the issues of segregation and racism in the Deep South at the time. But what happened? So he went to go stay with his cousins at the time, the Wrights. So his cousins' last names were the Wrights. He stayed with them for the summer. They were subsistence farmers. They lived on a plantation, and they farmed cotton during the summer. Emmett wasn't used to the manual labor of living in the country. So when he went there in 1955, he was very, very bored. All right, he spent his cousin said he spent like one day in the fields, and then after that, he made excuses and kind of stayed in the house and hung out kind of by himself. So that summer, or near the end of the summer, he and his cousins went. They borrowed their father, his uncle, Mose Wright's car, and they went into town to essentially a corner store one day. So all the boys, all the cousins kind of piled in. The oldest boy drove, and they went to the store in Money, Mississippi. What happened the day that Emmett Till, what happened the day that sort of sparked his death, essentially? Emmett, he went inside the store by himself. They're sort of gathered around the store. His cousin Simeon Wright followed after him kind of a minute later. They purchased their items. They came out. Nothing kind of happened. The wife of the store owner's name was Carolyn Bryant. She was working behind the counter at that time. She came out of the store. When she walked out of the store, so she kind of came out of the store because her shift was done, Emmett whistled at her. Everyone freaked out. Emmett Till, being a young African American, and this is the Deep South of Mississippi, he broke the unwritten code of the time, which was he made a pass. He sort of made a, hey, you're sexy, but only in whistle, to a white woman. So everyone freaked out. They all ran and jumped in the car. They piled in the car, and they took off back home to their house outside Money. Now, why did Emmett Till do that? Emmett's mom said that he whistled when he was nervous. His cousins who were there at the time said he was just trying to be funny. He was trying to make a joke. He was trying to crack a joke. Well, unfortunately, Carolyn Bryant's husband didn't take it that way. So Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam They took him from his uncle's home. They came in the middle of the night. They beat him. They crushed in one of his eyes. They shot him in the head. They tied a 70-pound cotton gin fan around his neck and threw him in the river. Now, I know this image is disturbing, but this is what his body looked like when it was found. So he was killed for whistling at a white woman. He was murdered. He was lynched for whistling at a white woman. The way that his mother could tell that it was him was his ring. That's actually how his uncle, Mose Wright, identified the body. So J.W. Milam, which was was her brother, and Roy Bryant, her husband, killed Emmett Till for whistling at Carolyn Bryant. So this teenage boy, this 14-year-old, was murdered because he dared to whistle at a white woman. And his death is going to end up sparking the civil rights movement. Why? Because his mom was so brave to put these horrible pictures in the Chicago Defender, which was the black magazine of note at the time, black newspaper of note at the time, but not also the Chicago Defender, but Ebony magazine, which is produced here in Chicago. And those images spread all throughout the United States. And every teenage African American who saw those images, their hearts were just wrenched. And they are going to be the African Americans that in 4 or 5 years are going to be in college, and they are going to be the ones who are participating in the sit-ins, who are participating in the protests, who are participating in the marches. And their minds, their hearts are going to be moved to make sure that this type of thing never happens again. So, what are some inaccuracies about what happened that day? He never said, "Bye, baby." That is a myth, an urban legend, and it was put forward at the time to make him seem like he was worse than he was, because there would have been many whites that would have said, well, he asked for it by saying that to a white woman. His cousins didn't dare him to do it. He never bragged about dating a white girl, so in the 1950s, it was a social taboo for African Americans to have relations with white people. And the white Southerners at the time made up stories about him bragging about dating a white girl to try to make him seem worse or seem bad. His uncle, Mose Wright, this is his uncle. His uncle bravely stood up in a courtroom and pointed at the men who took him at gunpoint out of his home and said, "There he is." And the newspapers tried to paint his uncle at the time as uneducated, ignorant man by saying that he said, "Dar he," like there he is, "Dar he." They tried to make him seem uneducated. That's not true. He never said that. He literally said, "There he is." So there were wild, sort of misinformation stories that went around at the time that were not true. So Emmett Till, the lynching of this young teenage boy, his death, caused African Americans to be outraged to the point where they were going to stand up in ways that they'd never stood up before. Now, did African Americans stand up for their rights before then? Yes. Were African Americans involved in the civil rights movement before then? Yes. But his death was going to anger so many Americans, so many African Americans, that they were going to stand up, and the movement of the civil rights movement began. How did his death affect others? All right. So white people in the South were defensive. At first, there was a minor backlash against his murder. Whites in the South were upset. But then when the news reporters came down, when the NAACP came down to investigate the death, they sort of reflexively started to defend themselves and support segregation. African Americans in the South were fed up. They realized that the federal government was not going to step in and help them. African Americans in the North were spurred into action, and they realized really how bad segregation was in the South, because many of them were three generations away from the South. And his mother, Emmett Till's mom, Mamie, said, a few weeks ago, I lived in an apartment in Chicago, and what happened to quote-unquote Negroes in the South didn't affect me, but now it does. So literally, black people in the North were in many ways insulated against the harsh reality of segregation. Now, of course, we know that there was segregation and racism in Chicago, but comparatively in the South, it was way worse, right? If you stepped out of line in any way, shape, or form, your life was on the line. If you questioned Jim Crow in any way, shape, or form, your life was on the line. So African Americans in the North really saw how horrible it was in the South, and they're going to, this next generation of young African Americans are going to stand up and fight for their rights. All right? So that is Emmett Till. And you're going to read and you're going to watch the supplemental video. I know you're going to watch the supplemental video because it's really interesting. And it ties into a lot of the stuff that's taking place today. The death of young African Americans continues. Think of what just happened in the news. Ahmaud Arbery, young black man out for a jog, killed because he was, quote unquote, in the wrong neighborhood. So while we have made many advances in our society, in many ways, things are just the same. So I want you to investigate Emmett Till. I want you to learn about his life. I want you to honor him. Like, I want you to really dig into this lesson and honor this boy by learning about his life, this young man. And don't just take today's lesson like it's the same old, same old. Really get as smart as you possibly can. All right, I love you guys. High school is around the corner. You're almost done with 8th grade. I want you to pay attention because there's an update, some information on promotion. So I want you to read that. I'm going to post it in my classroom. I love you guys. Stay safe. Catch you on the flip side.